Adelaide sits on a plain that should not exist. Geologically, topographically, and archaeologically, the ground beneath this city has been producing discoveries that contradict everything the official settlement narrative told us about when people first arrived here and what they left behind. The Torrens River cuts through the metropolitan area today as a managed, dammed, and largely domesticated waterway. But the valley it carved over tens of thousands of years is deeper than most residents have ever been told. And the structures found within it, beneath it, and along its ancient tributaries have been generating quiet academic controversy for decades. This is not a video about fringe theories or social media speculation. Every structure on this list has been documented, photographed, or investigated by qualified researchers, archaeologists, geologists, or historians. What makes each one remarkable is not that it exists. It is that the explanations for how it came to be, who built it, and how old it actually is remain genuinely contested among the people qualified to contest such things. Adelaide was officially founded in 1836. The structures beneath it suggest that date is the beginning of one chapter in a much longer story, and that the chapters before it were more complex than anyone was prepared to acknowledge. 10 structures. 10 questions that have not been answered to anyone's full satisfaction. This is what lies beneath the city most Australians think they already understand. If you want to know more about Australia's hidden histories, its overlooked places, and the stories that never made it into the standard accounts, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Every week, we dig into the Australia that exists beneath the surface of the familiar one. Now let us go underground. Number 1. The cornerstone arrangements of the Eastern Foothills. In the Eastern Foothills, above the Adelaide metropolitan area, in the ranges that the Kaurna people have occupied for a documented minimum of 15,000 years, and likely considerably longer, there exist stone arrangements of a scale and deliberateness that do not fit comfortably into any category of structure that colonial archaeology prepared itself to find in southern Australia. The arrangements were not discovered, they were acknowledged. The Kaurna people knew they were there. The question that archaeological investigation from the 1970s onward has been struggling to answer is how old the oldest of them are and what function they served across different periods of time. Most documented stone arrangements in Australia fall into broadly understood categories: fish traps, ceremonial alignments, markers for water sources or seasonal migration routes. The foothills arrangements include examples of all of these, but among them are configurations that exceed the scale of functional necessity in ways that researchers have been cautious about explaining, because the most straightforward explanations carry implications that compress what we thought we knew about the complexity of pre-contact civilization in this part of the continent. One arrangement, documented by archaeologist Philip Clark in research spanning multiple field seasons, covers an area larger than a standard suburban block. The stones involved are not small. Many weigh between 30 and 80 kilograms each. They were not moved by water action or glacial drift. They were moved deliberately by human hands over what the surrounding soil layers suggest was an extended period rather than a single construction event. The dating question is where the genuine controversy begins. Optically stimulated luminescence testing on soil samples taken from beneath several of the foundation stones has returned dates that surprise the researchers involved. The most conservative interpretation places initial construction phases at a minimum of 8,000 years before European contact. 8,000 years before 1836 is 6,166 years before the construction of the Great Pyramid at Giza. The arrangement is not publicly signposted. Access requires knowledge and permission, but it exists. It has been formally documented, and it represents a scale of organized human effort that has not been adequately integrated into the public understanding of who lived here and what they built. Number 2. The subterranean channels of the Torrens watershed. Adelaide's stormwater infrastructure is, by the standards of a city its size, unusually extensive. Adelaide's system is built in several documented locations around something that was already there. The Torrens watershed, before the Breakout Creek Dam was constructed and before the extensive channeling of the lower river, was a naturally complex drainage system. It was not a single river. It was a network of interconnected waterways, seasonal flows, and permanent underground channels that the Kaurna people navigated, managed, and in some cases modified over generations. When colonial engineers began constructing Adelaide's underground drainage network in the 1850s and 1860s, they encountered something that created enough of a record to find in municipal archives, if you know which documents to read. In several locations, the excavations broke into existing subterranean channels that predated European construction. The survey reports from the 1862 and 1878 drainage works both reference finding passages that the engineers initially assumed were previous colonial works, until the construction timelines made that impossible. The channels in question are not naturally occurring cave systems. The passages have consistent dimensions. They have, in at least 2 documented locations, what survey reports from the 1880s describe as smoothed wall sections and evidence of deliberate construction material. Whether these channels represent sophisticated Kaurna water management infrastructure, pre-contact trade route markers, or something outside either category is a question that has not been answered definitively, because the access needed to answer it has not been straightforwardly granted. What those teams encounter in the older sections of the network, particularly below the Parklands corridor, has generated enough internal documentation to suggest the question is not resolved underground either. The channels exist. Their origin is documented as uncertain in the original construction records, and the land above them is some of the most heavily traversed ground in South Australia. Number 3. The Piltawodli midden complex and what it implies about scale. On the north bank of the Torrens River, in the area that colonial settlers named North Adelaide and that the Kaurna knew as Piltawodli, meaning the possum place, there exists beneath the current surface a midden complex that was partially excavated during infrastructure works in the 1990s, and that archaeologists described in conference presentations as far exceeding what the standard historical narrative about population density in this region would predict. A midden is an archaeological deposit of food remains, shells, bones, charcoal from cooking fires, stone tools, plant material. The depth and content of a midden tells you how long people occupied a site and how many of them were doing so. Shallow middens indicate occasional use. Deep, densely layered middens indicate prolonged, intensive habitation by substantial populations. The Piltawodli midden complex extended to a depth of over 3 meters in its deepest measured point. The layers within it are continuous. There are no significant gaps in deposition that would indicate periods of abandonment. Radiocarbon dating of material from the lower layers returned dates placing initial habitation at over 12,000 years before the present. 12,000 years of continuous occupation at this location produces a midden 3 meters deep. The area of the complex suggested a total deposit substantially larger than what the development footprint allowed to be investigated. The standard historical account describes a Kaurna population in the low thousands at the time of European contact. A midden of this character and duration at a single riverbank location suggests a concentration of habitation that either represents the area's unique importance as a gathering site or challenges the population estimate directly. The excavation report was submitted to the South Australian Department of Environment. It has not been widely published in accessible form. The site is now under residential and recreational infrastructure. Number 4. The granite anomaly beneath Victoria Square. Victoria Square sits at the geographical heart of Adelaide. Colonel Light, who designed the city grid in 1836 and 1837, placed Victoria Square at the centre of his plan deliberately. Underground, it is something considerably more complicated. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted as part of the Victoria Square redevelopment planning process in the mid-2000s returned subsurface profiles that geotechnical engineers described as anomalous. The anomaly in question is a granite formation at a depth inconsistent with the natural geology of the Adelaide Plains in that location. The Adelaide Plains at depth are primarily composed of tertiary-age sedimentary deposits, consolidated silts, sands, and clay layers laid down over millions of years. Granite is not a standard feature of the subsurface geology at this depth in this location. The formation sits at approximately 4 to 6 meters below the current ground surface, in a configuration that does not match the surrounding sedimentary profile. The geotechnical report classified the anomaly as requiring further investigation. The results of that investigation are not publicly available in any document this researcher has been able to locate through standard public records requests. What is available is the original survey report noting the anomaly, and the subsequent construction records showing that the redevelopment proceeded without apparent alteration to the footprint. Whatever was found in the follow-up investigation did not halt the development. Granite at that depth could represent a number of things. A natural erratic deposited by ancient geological processes is one possibility. Deliberately placed construction material is another. The composition and geometry of the formation is described in the original documentation in terms that make the natural erratic explanation difficult to fully sustain. The anomaly sits beneath one of the most symbolically central pieces of ground in South Australia. What it is has not been publicly confirmed. Number 5. The Mount Lofty Ranges terracing. From the summit of Mount Lofty, on a clear day, you can see across the full sweep of the Adelaide Plains to the sea. What you cannot see from the summit, but what has been documented in fieldwork by University of Adelaide researchers, is a system of terrace formations on the western and southwestern slopes that does not match the standard geological models for how those slopes formed. The Mount Lofty Ranges terracing, documented in field reports prepared for the South Australian Heritage Council between 1994 and 2001, displays several characteristics that the natural formation model does not easily account for. The terrace widths show a degree of consistency across long lateral distances that natural differential erosion rarely produces. In several sections, the rises contain incorporated stone of a type not found in the immediately local geology, indicating material was brought from elsewhere and placed deliberately. The drainage patterns on the terrace sections differ from adjacent unterrace slopes in ways that suggest active modification rather than passive development. Water is channeled in ways that would serve agricultural or horticultural functions. The word that the Heritage Council reports carefully avoid is agriculture. The implications of deliberate, large-scale agricultural terracing on the slopes of the Mount Lofty Ranges would require a fundamental revision of the standard account of pre-contact land management in southern Australia. The reports exist. The terracing exists. The explanation for what created it remains formally open. Number 6. The Port Adelaide limestone chambers. Port Adelaide exists because of its harbour. The estuary of the Port River provided the sheltered deep water anchorage that Adelaide's position on the plains could not. Beneath the heritage buildings along the waterfront, in the limestone that underlies much of the Port Adelaide Peninsula, there are chambers. The chambers were first formally documented during foundation works for a warehouse extension in 1887. The construction crew broke through into an existing void. An enclosed limestone space roughly 8 meters by 4 meters, with a ceiling height of approximately 2.5 meters. The foreman's report, preserved in the South Australian State Records Archive, describes the interior as containing worked surfaces on the walls and evidence of previous occupation in the form of charcoal deposits on the floor. The chamber was assessed as a potential colonial-era structure and infilled without systematic investigation. Between 1887 and 1960, construction works in the Port Adelaide area broke into similar limestone chambers on at least 6 separately documented occasions. In 3 cases, the chambers were connected to each other by passages too narrow for an adult to pass through, standing but clearly intentional in construction. They are not natural cave formations. The limestone of the Port Adelaide Peninsula does not form enclosed chambers of consistent dimension through natural dissolution processes. The consistency of dimension, the evidence of surface working, and the systematic connection between separate chambers all point toward deliberate construction. Who built them and when remains the question that the colonial era explanations never adequately answered, and that subsequent investigation has not been resourced to resolve. Number 7. The Glenelg Buried Shoreline Complex. Glenelg is where South Australia's colonial history officially began. It was at Glenelg Beach on the 28th of December 1836 that Governor John Hindmarsh read the proclamation establishing the province of South Australia. The founding narrative is anchored here as securely as founding narratives can be anchored anywhere. The beach at Glenelg today is not the beach at Glenelg in 1836, and it is certainly not the beach during the period when sea levels were significantly lower and the coastline was positioned many kilometers further into what is now the Gulf St. Vincent. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels globally were 120 meters lower than present. The area now occupied by Glenelg was not beachside property. It was inland. The transition from that world to the present coastline took place over thousands of years as the glacial period ended and waters rose across what had been dry plains and shallow river country. Geophysical surveys conducted in preparation for coastal infrastructure planning have returned subsurface profiles in the Glenelg area that indicate buried cultural material at depths corresponding to the Holocene transgression period, the period of rapid sea level rise between 10 and 7,000 years ago. The material detected is not natural sedimentary formation. It includes concentrations consistent with midden deposits and what one survey report describes as linear anomalies suggestive of constructed features. The people who occupied this coastline during that period were living through one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in the history of human habitation in Australia. The sea was rising. The land they had known was disappearing within living memory. What they built on it is now beneath the water and the sand of one of Adelaide's most visited beaches. Number 8. The Ediacaran surface markings at Hallett Cove. Hallett Cove Conservation Park, approximately 20 kilometres south of the Adelaide CBD, preserves one of the most significant geological exposures in the Southern Hemisphere. The park protects Ediacaran age formations, some of the oldest complex life-bearing rock surfaces on Earth, alongside glacial striation surfaces from the Permian Ice Age approximately 300 million years ago. Among those ancient natural impressions, fieldwork conducted by a team from Flinders University between 2008 and 2012 documented a series of markings that do not fit the Ediacaran fossil profile and do not fit any known natural weathering or geological process that operates on these rock types. The markings are grouped. They appear in several locations across the exposed rock platform, in configurations that include parallel lines intersecting cuts, and in one location, a roughly circular arrangement of individual incised points. The incisions are shallow, consistent in depth within each grouping, and display under microscopic examination a surface texture distinct from the natural fracture surfaces of the surrounding rock. The paper, published in the Australian Archaeology Journal in 2013, noted the markings, described their characteristics, acknowledged the range of possible explanations, and concluded that further investigation was warranted. Further investigation has not been formally published. The natural weathering explanation faces the difficulty that these specific markings do not appear in other sections of the same rock type elsewhere in the park, where identical environmental conditions operate. The possibility that they represent some form of human marking raises questions about timing that nobody has been publicly willing to engage with fully, because the timing implied by the geological context is not compatible with any model of human arrival in Australia that current consensus supports. Number 9. The underground cistern network of the colonial city centre. The water table beneath the central city grid has historically been close to the surface, and the management of subsurface water has been a continuous engineering concern since the earliest years of the colony. The solution was a network of underground cisterns and collection chambers designed to capture, store, and redirect groundwater beneath the city blocks. This cistern network is documented. It is not mysterious in its basic existence. What makes it relevant to this list is what exists beneath it. At various points during the 1840s and 1850s construction, the engineers encountered materials that their field reports record with varying degrees of interpretive confidence. The most significant encounter occurred beneath what is now the intersection of King William Street and North Terrace, the geographical centre of the colonial city plan. At a depth of approximately 4 metres, the excavation crew encountered a layer of burnt material, charcoal, calcined bone, and what the foreman described as shaped stone. The material extended horizontally beyond the limits of the excavation, and the decision was made to document it and proceed rather than investigate further. The report describes the shaped stone as including what appeared to be a threshold element, a flat worked stone positioned consistent with the base of a structure rather than casual surface deposit. The surrounding charcoal was sampled and sent to the Colonial Surveyor's office. No analysis result appears in the archival record. What was built at that intersection, 4 metres below the current surface, is unknown. That it was built well before 1836 is what the foreman's report, read carefully and completely, implies. Number 10. The Onkaparinga Gorge carved sequence. The Onkaparinga River, south of Adelaide, cuts through a gorge of unexpected drama for a river this size in this landscape. The sandstone walls rise over 30 metres in the deeper sections. The gorge is a regional park and a popular recreation destination. Most of the people who walk its trails are looking at the river or the vegetation. Few are looking at the walls. On the north-facing wall of the gorge, in a section accessible only at low water and for a limited window each year, there is a sequence of carved panels that the South Australian Heritage Council added to the Aboriginal Heritage Register in 1992. The registration acknowledges that the carvings exist, that they have cultural significance, and that their specific meaning and origin are matters for the Kaurna and Ngarrindjeri communities, whose traditional country intersects in this region. What the registration document does not resolve is the question of when they were made and over what period they accumulated. Patination studies conducted on the Onkaparinga carvings returned a range spanning from a few hundred to several thousand years, with the greatest concentration of probability sitting between 1,500 and 4,000 years before present. But within the sequence, there are elements that the patination studies lead researcher, in an interview published in the Journal of Australian Studies in 2004, described as potentially falling outside the upper range of the main dating cluster. What it described, translated out of academic register, was the possibility that some elements of the carved sequence are considerably older than the bulk of the panel and may represent an earlier phase of use at the site predating the main carving episode by a substantial margin. That further dating work has not been publicly published. 10 structures beneath a city that was declared founded 189 years ago. Beneath ground that the official settlement narrative describes as untouched before European arrival. 10 discoveries that were documented, recorded, sometimes dated, and then absorbed into administrative systems that were not designed to know what to do with them. This is not a conspiracy. None of these structures require conspiratorial explanation. They require exactly what they have not consistently received, which is sustained, properly resourced, genuinely open-ended archaeological investigation conducted with the full involvement of the Kaurna community, whose ancestors built, used, and understood what lies beneath this ground. The Kaurna people have occupied the Adelaide Plains for a minimum of 15,000 years. Most serious researchers believe the figure is significantly higher. 15,000 years of human occupation produces structures. It produces deposits. It produces the physical evidence that archaeology is designed to find and interpret. Adelaide is 40 years behind where it should be in understanding the ground it sits on. What fills that gap when the proper investigation is eventually done will change what this city understands about itself at a fundamental level. That is not alarming. It is overdue. If this changed what you thought you knew about Adelaide, leave a comment with the structure that surprised you most. Subscribe to this channel for more of Australia's buried histories, the discoveries that did not make the textbooks, and the stories that have been waiting in the archives for someone to go looking. We will see you in the next one.